Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the regular virtual meeting of the City Planning Commission Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, March 25th, 2021. This meeting includes the remote participation of board members and staff as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local public health emergency. For the record, my name is Alyssa Olson and I am the Vice President of the Planning Commission. At this time, I will call the meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll to verify the quorum.
Commissioner Baxley.
Present.
Commissioner Caprini. She's coming. Commissioner Smiley.
Here.
Commissioner Ford.
Here.
Commissioner Marwa. Commissioner McGuire. Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Commissioner Schrader.
Here.
Commissioner Sweezy.
Here.
Did you say my
That's
name?
6 members present.
Chris Myers.
All right. We have a quorum. So next we will proceed to the agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioners, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Commissioner Smiley.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Do I have a second? A second to adopt the agenda. Commissioner Ford.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Baxley.
Aye.
Commissioner Caprini. Commissioner Smiley.
Aye.
Commissioner Ford.
Aye.
Commissioner Marwa. Commissioner McGuire. Commissioner Meyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Aye. Oh, Rachel, you might have cut out for a second there.
Okay, that was my experience too. The last I heard was Commissioner Olson, so Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Thank you. And Commissioner Sweezy.
Aye.
All right, that's 7 yeas.
All right, next on the agenda is acceptance of the minutes from the regular meeting on March 11th, 2021. Commissioners, can I have a motion to accept those minutes? Commissioner Smiley.
I move to accept the minutes of March 11th meeting.
Is there, Commissioner Meyer?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Baxley.
Aye.
Commissioner Caprini. Commissioner Smiley.
Aye.
Commissioner Ford.
Aye.
Commissioner Marwa. Commissioner McGuire. Commissioner Meyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Olson.
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader.
Aye.
Commissioner Sweezy.
Aye.
That's 7 yeas.
All right. Next up are the discussion items. We don't have any consent items tonight. And we're starting with item number 4, North Loop redevelopment at 117 to 125 North First Street. This item is for joint review with the Heritage Preservation Commission, who we have with us today, and staff is Aaron Hanauer.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Hello, Commissioners. The Commentator Foundry Apartment Project. The project site is at the intersection of First Street North and 2nd Avenue North in the St. Anthony Falls and Warehouse historic districts. The development team still has entitlements for a hotel project that was approved by the HPC and the Planning Commission in 2018, 2019. And it is the applicant's intent to build that hotel project, shown in the upper slide, but there have been challenges that exist in securing funding for a hospitality project during COVID. And that project back in 2018, 2019, I'll go through it in more detail, but that project, just like what you'll be seeing today, was looking to rehabilitate the Commutator Foundry building at the intersection, as well as the Raw Wolf building in the middle of the development site. So now in front of you, looking to make alternative plans in case that hotel project is not able to be financed. The intention is to have the updated proposal maintain the aesthetic of the previously approved project in appearance, massing, and materials. You'll see the masonry and metal panel being the primary exterior materials. The new project, or the new proposal, is like the previous version, having approximately 12,000 square feet of ground floor retail, 73 apartments, and then 2 floors of underground parking that provide 49 parking spaces. Staff and the applicant are seeking the commission feedback as the applicant prepares to submit formal applications to the HPC and the Planning Commission. And we're just looking to answer questions you may have, given it's a little unique to have entitlements from a previous project. We don't really have to get into that. We can just evaluate the current project on its own merits, but we do see the applicant really trying to respect their previous approvals and that design. So we're looking at a certificate of appropriateness to the HPC to allow for the rehabilitation and new construction, and site plan review for the Planning Commission. Staff agrees with the applicant that the new design is in the spirit of the previous proposal approvals. And from a land use standpoint and design, we see the new project complying with the comprehensive plan guidance and site plan review requirements. From a preservation standpoint, can still see this project meeting the Warehouse Historic District guidelines. I do want to bring 2 items to the Commission's attention in reviewing the HPC guidelines. First, the applicant is looking to set back the building from this east, I'll call it the eastern interior line, approximately 10 feet from that property line, to allow for functional windows for those upper story apartments. But with that, they would still be maintaining that continuous street wall by having this infill construction match up with the building to the east. This is a similar treatment to a new infill project like the archive across the street. So we could see staff recommending support for that to the commission. And then second, the applicant's proposing to have just slightly projecting balconies on the street elevations. It would be 2 feet from the main building plane, and that distance is similar to the Commutator Foundry bay windows shown at the intersection here. We saw support for, we could see support for this this proposal in the advisory guidelines of the Warehouse District, and given that there is this projection on the Commutator building as part of this project. So with that concludes my short presentation. I know we have the development team that's here to fill in items I didn't talk about and introduce the project from their standpoint. And I believe David Wilson is is going to kick things off for the development and design team. But happy to answer questions you may have.
Commissioners, are there any questions for staff right now from either commission? You can write it in the chat and I will call on you. All right, so I guess then we can hear from the development team.
Good afternoon, commissioners. And Aaron, thank you very much for the introduction of the project. I think you covered all of the key points. I don't want to take a lot of time because I do want to turn this over to our consultants who will walk through more specifics. But I did just want to say that I, along with my two partners on the development team, John Gross and Andrew Commerce, are attending this meeting, and we are available for any questions that you might have about this project. I will note that the reason we are pursuing a Plan B for this site is because we are very interested in bringing these two historic buildings back to life and getting this project built in order to contribute to the North Loop community. We have our consultants from New History who can answer questions regarding our historic preservation plans, and our design team is led by Snow Krylik Architects. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen Liu from Snow Krylik, who is the design project manager. Karen?
Thank you, David. Aaron, are you sharing the screen right now?
Karen, I am. I can.
Okay.
Would you like me to stop sharing and I'll turn it over to you?
Go ahead. Can you just go back to images?
Yes.
I can just go into a little more detail in terms of the changes that have been made to the project along the exterior in order to accommodate the multifamily program.
Karen,
there we go.
Just keep on letting me know where you want me to go if you'd like me to keep on
Will do.
presenting. Okay.
Thank you. So the balconies that Aaron mentioned that are semi-recessed project 2 feet from the building exterior along the north 1st Street, as well as the west along 2nd Avenue. Balconies to the east in that setback area that Aaron mentioned and to the alley to the south are a full 4-foot balcony. The massing of the project is such that the sort of wing adjacent to the commutator building has a community room set back. So there's a small roof terrace facing the north and a small roof terrace for a private 2-bedroom unit facing the south on that wing. In addition to that, if you go to the next slide, Aaron, there is a roof terrace on the top level above level 6 that is accessed by both stairs and elevator. And one more landscape item that I'd like to point out, Aaron, if you could go to the site plan that includes the second project, that would be great.
Does this?
Yes.
Yep.
So facing the alley, there's a small plaza that acts as a pedestrian entrance from the alley, and that is aligned with the plaza and pedestrian portal of the second project to the south. And with that, I think those are the major changes that we have to the exterior. I'd open it up to questions.
All right, thank you. Commissioners, if you would like to speak, say so in the chat, and we'll start with Commissioner Esmaili.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I have a couple questions about this, and I wasn't on the commission when this came forward first. So just kind of wondering, you did refer to this proposal as an option B, as in it may still not happen. Did I hear that correctly?
This is David Wilson. I'll respond, Commissioner. So we are continuing to pursue financing for the hospitality project that was originally proposed. We had our financing in place last spring, however, not signed on the dotted line. And when the pandemic hit, the bank put things on hold, and then in the fall notified us that they were no longer lending for hospitality in the marketplace. We had spent probably 6 months looking for other institutions interested in financing hotels, and pretty much the industry stopped lending for hotels due to the pandemic. In the fall, we decided that it was important to get a great building built on this site, and we wanted to have a plan B ready to go. And so we hired Snow Krylik to develop this multifamily option for the site.
So I guess, and I totally understandable. My question, and then my follow-up question is, at what point will you make the final decision of which option to go with? And then the other thing is, if you do end up, like, if you are able to get the financing in place and decide to go with option, the first option as the hotel, are the design elements going to stay exactly the same, or are you potentially incorporating some of this option B design elements into that option as well?
We intend to make a decision. We are working on financing actually both of those options as we speak, and we intend to make a decision hopefully this spring, when we will have a commitment from financial institutions to support one or the other of the projects. And as it relates to the potential for changing the hotel design, that's not contemplated at this time. However, what I will say is, with the current hospitality industry financing environment, until we're actually engaged in a negotiation with a bank, we're not sure whether there might be some things that we might want to incorporate from this design. Right now, we're not contemplating that.
Thank you. I just have one other question that's related to one of the changes that's made, and that's with the building in the middle. And I was just curious about the change in the color of the exterior of the building, and just kind of wondering, and I'm glad that commissioners from the Historic Preservation Commission are also present. I'm just kind of wondering how that works out and why you decided to go that way, and is it basically, is it okay from the historic preservation standpoint? And
Sure.
maybe staff can chime in there as well, but please go ahead.
Karen, I can look forward to turning it over to you in a second, but I guess one of the big things for if staff would support a different color, different painting, especially when it involves masonry, is the building currently painted? Is the brick currently painted? And it is in this case, so I don't see us having an issue from a preservation standpoint about that.
I would just say, Erin, can you go back to so we can see the comparison? That the painting of the Row Wolf building dark is too. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Okay.
That would allow it to stand out and articulate the different building masses more.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Baxley.
Thank you. Karen, could you walk through a little bit the balconies, which, other than the proportion, seems to be one of the more significant changes from the original proposal? Could you just talk about the materiality of those, what they're made of, both on the street side and the alley, a little bit?
Sure. In this rendering, they are a steel picket balcony, similar to that at Second and Second, and the color is to match the buff masonry.
Is it just a concrete slab extension then for the base?
Yes, we are working out the detail of this semi-recessed, semi-projecting. The projecting ones would be more of a standard, aluminum hung balcony. The semi-recessed might be a combination.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, are there any other comments or questions? I'm not seeing anyone in the chat. Commissioner Ford.
Thank you. You got technical on this there at the very end there. Could you explain those two types of construction for balconies?
So the hung balcony is a separate structure that is attached to the building, and that would happen with the balconies along the east and along the south alley because they're fully projecting. With the semi-recessed, we haven't fully worked out the structural detail, but there's the possibility for part of it to be aluminum, similar to the ones that are hung, and part of it to be part of the construction of the building itself, meaning it would have a meaning it would be floor joists, part of the, I guess, unit construction, I would say.
So excuse me. Am I correct then in understanding that the eastern facing balconies would have a chain or a brace that hangs from the wall and projects to the
Can we go to the next one, Aaron? Yeah, there we go. Our goal is to conceal that in any way possible. So whether it's in the railing, the decorative railing of the project, we'd prefer not to see a brace of any sort.
Yeah. And I gather that on the north facing facade here, there is no plan to have braces. Is that correct?
Correct. That would not be necessary.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Commissioner Sundberg.
Commissioner Sundberg and Commissioner Olson, I apologize. Could I add one thing before you speak, Commissioner Sundberg? So maybe you could incorporate this into your comments. Something that I noted in the memo that I didn't highlight in my presentation was one of the other proposed changes is on the upper floors. This is the 6th floor that has a balcony that does extend to First Street. The 2019 HPC approved version does have a balcony that does extend in a similar fashion, but this proposal would go all the way to First Street North. And then going up one level, the rooftop terrace, I'm sorry if I called that the rooftop terrace is a proposal that would extend a fairer length of I'll call it north-south axis, but they do step it back 19 feet from First Street North, and it is in the middle portion of the building. So we would really like commissioner feedback on those two elements.
All right, Commissioner Sundberg.
Yeah, I was thinking back to when we reviewed this project before, and I completely understand that things have become a little rocky in the hospitality industry, and so and I don't think it would be a bad thing to have more housing available in this area. For the balconies, I guess I'm curious to see what other heritage preservation commissioners think, but I don't really have a problem with the balconies. I know that we don't typically like to see balconies on the front facade, but I think the fact that they're partially recessed So they're really kind of minimizing the visual impact and the way you've taken into consideration the projection of the existing bay windows, so that you're not, projecting even further out. I guess I felt like that was kind of a happy medium for allowing those units to have that balcony experience without, really, I think, at least in my mind, impacting the district as a whole. So I guess I am personally okay with those. The rooftop balconies, like the rooftop terrace, I know we don't typically like them to come out to the street, but I guess they seem fairly small. The two that, or the two smaller ones, which are the ones that go out to the outer edges of the building, seem, I don't know, like proportionally scaled to me, and that allows the bigger one to be set back. So I guess I thought that I don't know. I guess I liked that design intention there of recessing the bigger rooftop terrace via these smaller rooftop terraces. So they could be more centered in the building. I am curious and hoping that some of the other heritage preservation commissioners will give their thoughts on this. But I guess to me, it didn't seem like it was a great deviation from the previous design. I think you made the changes to accommodate the new program. The painted brick, I did also notice that the black painted brick does really stand out, but we don't normally restrict the colors of buildings, so that is sort of outside our typical discussion. It does really pop. And it looks like there are some HPC commissioners interested in talking, which is great. So I'll end with that.
Thank you. Commissioner Howard.
Good evening. Hope you can hear me. I really appreciate and I agree with the attempt to respect the original design on this. It's a tough design challenge for you. I think that in actuality, the reduced size of the masses, even they're even more in keeping with our guidelines. It helps to not overwhelm that little building quite as much. The black was a bit of a shock, but I agree it pops, and we don't restrict the color since it's already painted. I'm having a tough time with the balconies. The reading of our guidelines specifically says they shall not project beyond the building wall of the structure on the primary facade. To me, a projecting bay window is not a building wall. And so I don't think that the balconies meet our standards. So I'm curious if you investigated the ability to actually have recessed balconies on these front facades. I think that would be a much easier way to meet the standards or the design guidelines, sorry. And I'm just not sure. I didn't investigate, the layout inside or anything, but is there a spatial issue that you're not able to have recessed balconies?
Karen?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Yes, it is a spatial layout livability issue in maximizing the square footage there. And we did seem like it would be, since it's sort of local context and the commutator foundry is part of this project, we did feel like it was in keeping with that.
Yeah, I can see why. To me, the commutator is it's a separate building, and that is a projecting bay window. It is not the building wall in my reading of our guidelines. So I'd encourage you to continue looking at seeing if you can recess those completely. But I'm curious to see what other commissioners think. Overall, I think you've done a great job trying to meet the standards, and I appreciate the challenges that you've been facing. And so I want to see something happen here. I think it'll be a great project.
Commissioner, this is David Wilson. I just wanted to comment on one other consideration that the ownership team had regarding having recessed versus partially protruding balconies on that north face. And it was really a kind of a light and livability issue for the interior apartments. We have received feedback, based on other projects that fully recessed balconies or terraces create very dark interiors. And with this being on the north side of the building, we're thinking about kind of the longevity of these being great places for people to live. And this allows a lot more light into those units because the recess isn't as deep. And so that was a consideration that wasn't just from a spatial perspective, but also from a light and livability.
In those cases, though, don't you also have shadowing coming from the balcony above? So I'm a little confused as to how that would make such a huge difference. We'd still have the balcony. If you're on one of the lower levels, you'd have that balcony above that's kind of shadowing your recess or your projection. So
because it's the north side, not as much shadowing, but point taken. It's light aesthetic.
Yeah, I get the challenges you guys are dealing with. I'm looking forward to seeing what other commissioners say. Like I said, this is just the way that I read the standards. Our standards are, there isn't a lot of, this is what the definition is, but to me, a building wall is the facade of the building, not a projecting big window. So,
Commissioner Howard, this is Tamara Helverson from New History, and I appreciate the point that you're making there. And I would just add, I think we were thinking in the spirit of the guidelines, and that since the balconies are housed in the fenestration portion of the guidelines, and a projecting bay window would be housed in the fenestration portion of the guidelines, we just really believed that working within the spirit of the window openings and respecting that projecting bay window was a creative design solution to what you've described as a challenging problem. But I've taken your notes, and thank you.
And I went to see if we could do a projecting bay window. I went back and looked in the guidelines to see, what other things we could look at besides the strict balcony portion.
I did
but
too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
All right, back to Commissioner Baxley.
Thanks. I do have a tough time comparing a bay window to a balcony. However, I think the balconies, if detailed right, are appropriate. And so, I question about the undersurface of that, which is really part of that view shed when you're down on the street. If we're seeing traditional sort of wood structure balcony underside, I think that is an issue. So hopefully the design team will really take that into consideration. And I do appreciate the shadowing issue. I wonder if there's an opportunity, those balconies are on corners, to get light in from the opposite side, even if it's a small slit, or I think would really help the light issue. Those are dark. I think structurally you could probably pull that off. But I think making sure the balcony is really just a fold out of that facade materially, making it as monolithic as possible would be preferred. But I don't have an issue with the balcony. On the upper terraces, I think that's great. I did see, it looks like there was some scuppering. I'm assuming you're taking water off of those and then draining it. Did I see that right? And so wondering, making sure that we're chasing all of that, none of that water is going to end up on the public way or splashing out from those upper terraces. It appeared as a scupper there, Karen. I didn't know if you guys are internally draining that or if that's just overflow or.
It will be internally drained.
Okay, thank you.
Bill, just to follow up on your comment, which I think is a really good one, in terms of the partially projected balconies, we 100% agree, and those would be treated in a very different way where it would read as, you're not going to see the structure exposed underneath there.
Great. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Sandbolt. Sorry if I said that wrong.
You got it right, Sandbolt. I guess my heartache here is I think our guidelines are pretty clear about projecting balconies, and I think we have to uphold what our guidelines require for this neighborhood. And I think on that front facade, unfortunately, I can't agree to the projecting balconies there. I think the guidelines are pretty clear and pretty straightforward. I've lived in a number of units that didn't have balconies. I think that's acceptable, especially for a few units in a building. So that's my 2 cents.
All right, I'm not seeing any more comments. Oh, Commissioner Ford.
Thank you. I just have 2 quick comments. I have no dog in the fight over balconies, the nature of the balcony. I appreciate the concern about being appropriate to the district, but my 2 comments are, first of all, I really think that the new design, the slimmer design of the apartment building is actually a great improvement over the mass of the first option A. I think it's a much more attractive facade along the whole street there. And then secondly, I'm really pleased to see that there's a chance of this going forward, because I know from my years with the city, there's been a long, painful history of attempts to develop this block in an appropriate way. And so I'm glad to see that there's an option B is being considered, and one that I think is more elegant looking.
Commissioner Baxley.
All right, one more on the balconies, but I think totally understand the issues and the guidelines there. I think I'll just say from a, just providing healthful environments, the ability to get outside, even if it's small, is really important. I think one thing that we've learned through this last year, both in our workplaces and our homes, is the ability to get outside is very important. So I understand the guidelines here, but I think providing housing that allows one to do that is really important. So thank you.
I just wanted to ask the commissioners, and thank you for all the comments. I've taken notes on if the commissioners that spoke about the balconies, in particular that was on the HBC, does guideline 3.62 provide enough relief for you to support the proposal? And that's fully recessed balconies will be considered for primary and secondary elevations. Okay, I just read that. So fully recessed balconies will be considered for primary and secondary facades of the new construction if evidence is provided that the building wall maintains the feeling of a solid building wall. So I didn't read closely those first few words, but probably it's deviating. You're feeling like the proposal is deviating from even that guideline.
Commissioner Howard.
Yeah, you caught yourself with those first few words. That's where I kept on going back to. If they were fully recessed, I think it would meet the guidelines very, very well. So I really encourage you to look at that a little bit closer. And as always, the devil is in the design details, right? We hear that all the time. So think about could they be pulled back even farther? So if it's not the full 2 feet out, are you looking at something else? But to read the guidelines as we have them, I really think they need to be fully recessed. I realize not many of us talked about the rooftop terrace. Just to put it on the record, I didn't have any concerns about the rooftop terrace.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Would that be maintained along the west side as well, if we wanted to maintain a semi-projecting? We could do that, right? Even though it's sort of the behind the commutator building.
It seems to me that those are not the primary facades.
Okay.
So they're not the same concern. And Aaron, you're the one who's going to be putting together the guidance on this. But to me, those are the secondary and actually tertiary facades. So it's not as big of a concern. My concern is the one with just the primary facade.
Okay, thank you.
Could I ask one more additional follow-up to just while we're all here, and we have your thoughts? Not, and this is just sort of throwing things out there, but if we actually did design a projecting bay window that came out 2 feet, that sounds like that would be acceptable. Can I just get confirmation on that? If, you know, just as our team is kind of exploring, I want to make sure we have all the options understood.
I believe that would be acceptable. I think that meets within the guidelines of the neighborhood.
Thanks.
This is Commissioner Howard again. I don't know that we specifically allow for it in our guidelines. That's why I said to Tamara before, I was kind of looking back, but I think that that would be more within the spirit of the intentions. So I would encourage Tamara to really look at those other window guidelines and see if there's something in there that might be able to make that case.
Surrounding historic buildings in alignment, type, and proportion.
Yeah.
So, as Commissioner Howard said, we don't get into the weeds on what we mean by that in type. I would understand and interpret that as that a bay window is compatible, given that we have them right here, projected bay windows.
Yeah.
All right. Commissioner Baxley, go ahead.
Sorry, I had to sneak it in there. So I'm just curious, team, on the adjacent building to the east, how much does the cornice project out on that building? Do you know, Karen? The existing building.
I don't know.
Okay.
The answer to that.
Last call. All right. Well, thank you to Aaron and the development team and the Heritage Preservation Commission. I hope you have a good evening.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes.
And next we'll move on to item number 5, zoning code text amendment, single room occupancy housing. And staff are Amber Turnquist and Jason Wittenberg.
Thank you, commissioners. Good afternoon. I'm joined by Amber Turnquist from Community Planning, and we're here to discuss a proposed zoning code text amendment that will authorize new single room occupancy housing in the city. This is a type of housing that people have not been able to establish in recent decades in the city, and we're not particularly unique in that circumstance. That is somewhat common for this type of housing to have been outlawed in many of our peer cities. But I'd say there is growing consensus that this is a housing type that serves an important function and is largely missing from our housing continuum. Minneapolis 2040 policies indicate that the city will create a regulatory framework to allow this type of housing. Amber has been leading this work for CPED, working with the offices of the 3 city council authors, as well as other departments that will have a role in regulating this use. So I'll turn it over to Amber in a moment to discuss kind of some of the draft conclusions that have been reached. I'll note that other city ordinances outside the zoning code will be doing some of the heavy lifting on this issue, so to speak, particularly those administered by our colleagues in regulatory services. I don't know the status of their draft code text, and that we weren't able to include that in your packets, but I believe that the issues that Amber will cover include both issues that will be addressed in the zoning code, as well as those that will be addressed in the other ordinances within the city code. With that, I'll turn it over to Amber.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Amber Turnquist with Long Range Planning. As Jason said, CPED has been working with council members Goodman, Gordon, and Schrader, and coordinating with a cross-departmental team of city staff on the zoning code text amendment that would amend regulations to permit the development of single-room occupancy units. There was a stakeholder meeting held in early February that provided valuable insight. Just to give you a brief overview, conversions of existing buildings and new construction of SROs would be permitted. SROs would be limited to parcels that allow 4 or more units, notably larger lots over 7,500 square feet in the Interior 2 built form district and in higher intensity districts. Occupancy would be limited to no more than 2 persons per room, as SROs are meant to fill the housing continuum gap for single adults, and the goal being affordability and minimizing overcapacity. City staff is considering a requirement that SRO units could only be established by nonprofits or governmental agencies with a track record of successfully managing housing. This is being reviewed by the City Attorney's Office. Standalone licenses would ensure renter protections for tenants, and it would use the current rental license foundation while adapting to unique uses, consistent with short-term rentals. Inspections would follow the rental license cycle, with Tier 1 and 2 receiving inspections every 5 to 8 years, and staff is proposing that Tier 3 properties not be eligible for an SRO license. I will now let Jason provide you with an overview of the zoning code text.
Yeah, I won't go into great detail on the zoning text. It's fairly straightforward. There's a definition, maybe a somewhat lengthy definition to get at what is entailed. This would go both into the zoning code as well as other codes that regulate this issue. Amber, if you're able to make that a little larger. As Amber alluded to, from a policy standpoint, as some of you may recall, the Minneapolis 2040 allows 4 or more housing units on a lot, starting in larger lots in the Interior 2 built form district. So our proposal is that in the R3 zoning district, which is generally appropriate in Interior 2, that this use would be allowed on 7,500 square foot lots or greater. Once you get to the next district higher than that, it drops down to more of a standard size lot of 5,000 square feet. We have a placeholder for any kind of specific development standards that we think would be applicable to this use that aren't going to go into other codes that address this issue. We are likely to deal with this, the maximum parking standard in the zoning code amendment that you're going to be seeing in April. I believe our draft on that is 1 space per 2 units. With that, I think that's a brief overview, and we're happy to take any questions or comments that the commissioners have.
Thank you. Commissioner Meyer, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to see this come forward. I think it's really important for us to provide this type of housing. I think our homelessness crisis has been exacerbated ever since rooming houses and boarding houses were made illegal, and a lot of them torn down. I don't really understand why we would have the bigger square footage requirement for the lower zones. That's reminiscent to me of the same discussion that we had for the emergency shelter ordinance. I would say if 5,000 is the amount of square feet that's required in order for this to be viable, that should be applicable to every zoning category. So I would change it from the 7,500 requirement down to 5,000. I also feel like it should apply to the interior 1 and 2 parts of the city as well. Like, it shouldn't just be in the higher density parts of the city where we allow these. So I would allow them throughout the city. I'm definitely opposed to limiting it to just government and nonprofit organizations. I think it makes complete sense to have a policy about their track record. If they have a bad track record, they shouldn't get new licenses. But if we want to encourage these, I think that we should promote policies that encourage them to be built. And then I also wanted to ask a question like, what is the legal status of like a hostel situation where you've got like multiple bunk beds in a room together? Like, I mean, I know that there are a few of them in the city, but they're very rare. Like, what are the requirements around that? Like, why are we limiting it to just like 2 people instead of like allowing more? Is what I'm trying to get at, I guess.
Amber, I think you've maybe been a little more in tune with the occupancy discussion about 1 versus 2 people living in a unit. Commissioner Meyer, I don't recall whether the city code at all addresses hostels. I will say that generally the ordinance does not allow rooming type units unless it's in conjunction with housing with supportive services. Otherwise, housing has to be a dwelling unit, which includes a restroom and a kitchen. But of course, a nursing home, supportive housing, you can have units that are basically self-contained that have shared facilities. Looks like Kimberly has her hand up.
I was just going to jump in. I don't know how many of you were on the commission well, actually, it maybe didn't even come before you, but there is one hostel in the city that's actually in the Washburn Fair Oaks Historic District. And so that was, did that come through Planning Commission?
No, but it was the first place I lived when I first moved to Minneapolis. So that's, so I had some familiarity with that. And I guess it's good to know and striking to me that that's the only one in the city that we allow. And I think.
And that one was allowed through a historic variance because it was a contributing building in the district.
Okay. Well, I think we should have more of those. So I mean that might be beyond the scope of this particular ordinance. Maybe there could be a separate hostel ordinance. But when I was, close to being bankrupt when I first moved here, like that was like a viable place for me to live, and I'm really glad that there was at least that one. I think there should be more of them. All right, that's all my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Meyer, just one thought. We do, of course, now allow intentional communities, which I don't know how much different that would be from that particular hostel situation. So maybe we're not as hostile to hostels as we think. If intentional communities cover that model, I'm not certain.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Smiley.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Actually, some of the things that I want to say, Commissioner Meyer already said, but I'm gonna echo that. I'm also really happy to see this. I think it's a great step to bridging the gap of housing options in the city. And I did have a similar, well, instead of specifically commenting on it, I wanted to ask about that square footage requirement and how you came to that number. And especially because you did specifically mention that lots of like from a degree further, you kind of in fact move into the 5,000 square foot lots anyway. So I'm just kind of wondering how you arrived at that at the square footage that you are you have mentioned as a requirement right now.
Sure, commissioners. Minneapolis 2040 indicates that in Interior 1, our lowest intensity district, that structures are limited to up to 3 units, so up to triplexes, and that you're not able to combine lots essentially. And once you get to Interior 2, 4 or more units are allowed on larger lots, and that translated to the built form regulations as allowing multifamily of 4 units or more on a 7,500 square foot lot. So essentially, we believe that that an SRO functions more like a multifamily building of 4 units or more and isn't really consistent with what we communicated to people that Interior 1 would be. It's the language about Interior 1 is that new and remodeled buildings in Interior 1 should be small scale residential. Individual lots are permitted to have up to 3 dwelling units. So a rooming house SRO that has maybe 8 units within it doesn't, in our view, seem consistent with that intent of the language in Interior 1.
So I guess just one follow-up question. So are you basically, and I understand the reasoning, but I'm just kind of wondering, will there be no exceptions? Or will you be potentially thinking about some special circumstances that smaller lots could be allowed? Because I'm just trying to figure out like how many of like there could be proposals coming in and how many of them will have to come in for variances and changes and things like that because of that very specific number that is mentioned in the code.
Right, that would be one potential option. Whether we want to entertain a lot of those types of variances is a question, I suppose. As proposed, that we just would not be allowing them in what's currently the R1 through R2B zoning districts. Of course, we haven't done the land use rezoning study yet for Minneapolis 2040, following up on the built form work. So that question will come up again once we do the land use rezoning study about which districts in entirely new kind of districts where R1 through R2B maybe don't even exist. So that question will be asked again in the coming years, but yeah, there is certainly the possibility that we would be seeing variance requests from what you said, as you said, a very specific standard.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ford.
Thank you. This relates, I suppose, to the same issue about the square footage and what zones they will be allowed in, the one that Commissioner Meyer raised. But I'm wondering, and this again may not be the right place to be raising.
Commissioner Ford, I think you muted yourself on accident.
You know, I pushed something down and shouldn't have done that.
Oh, you pushed it again.
What's happening now?
There,
Okay.
now we can hear you.
We'll try and have it not doing anything. Okay.
So
my question is has there been any thought given to the issue of concentration in areas? Concentration of this kind of building, thinking, of course, about concentration of poverty. Is that been discussed anywhere? Is that what being considered as to limiting the number of units per block or whatever be an appropriate way of looking at it?
Commissioners, I don't believe that has been really something that's been considered. There are some that this use would be fall under congregate living use. There are some congregate living uses that have spacing requirements where they're required to be a certain distance from one another to address the issue that you mentioned. However, that has not been something that we have proposed or discussed for SROs.
Thank you. I'm old enough to go back to the 70s and 80s with the city, and I there were issues with concentration of halfway houses and concentrations of similar houses that the city in its desire to be welcoming and recognizing the need for various kinds of housing like that. There were times when, like, Whittier East got swamped with all of the halfway houses, not all of them, but many of them, and other neighborhoods around the city were the places where these congregated, and to the point where it caused problems, as any kind of concentration of poverty will. So I think I think it's a good idea that we're having SROs again, and in a way that's that's going to be regulated and so forth. But I think some thought should be given to concentration of these SRO units. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Commissioner Caprini.
Hello. So Commissioner Ford pretty much asked my question, and then now it turns into just a comment. So one of the things that I've been really trying to do for myself, being on the City Planning Commission, is try to change the way that I speak to things. So, when we're talking about SROs, which I think this is a really great opportunity, I instantly went to a place where I thought about, I'm going to use my own family as an example, my daughter, my 21-year-old. She lives at home. She's a senior at the University of Minnesota. She could go and live in some place like this. She's not on drugs. She's not an alcoholic. She is a young, vibrant woman who wants to live in the city. She wants to live in an affordable place and wants to be on her own. Really, she doesn't, because she kind of digs living at home. But I would really like for us to start to when we speak about these kinds of things, encompass the conversation or encompass the idea that the folks that could be housed in some of these places aren't always what someone assumes. So I say this because I'm curious when we talk about concentration, very concerned about concentration. So I need to understand the square footage piece and also the location. So I'm going to use a neighborhood as an example outside of where I live. And I'm not suggesting that this is where it should be. I'm simply using it as a suggestion to parallel with what I've said about who are you expecting to occupy these spaces. I'm tired of the assumption that some have, not necessarily Commissioner Ford, just us in general as a people, that it's going to be the boogeyman. So Linhurst Neighborhood. Can we get an SRO in the Linhurst Neighborhood according to these requirements?
Commissioner, I don't have a mental map of the built form districts specifically in Linhurst, but my guess is that it would be limited to the corridors in a place like Linhurst.
Well, I would actually love to know more about that, because my biggest concern is concentration. And as much as I am all for this opportunity, I think this is fantastic. I'm hoping to change the narrative that it's not always what it seems. We're trying to house people, and there are all kinds of people that could utilize this kind of housing. So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Caprini. Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you. Commissioner Caprini stated a lot of what I wanted to state as well. I'm very supportive of this type of use, but want to see where this would be able to take place throughout the city and make sure that people can be equitably distributed throughout the city. I think there's a really big desire for these types of uses, and people want to live by the lakes. They want to live by transit. They want to live by amenities. And I want to make sure that this is open to that people living in these types of housing can live by those types of amenities as well. But I also agree with Commissioner Meyer's comments earlier, very supportive of this. I think the square footage question echoes with me, keeping it consistent throughout districts. So yeah, just echoing what Commissioner Meyer and Caprini said. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire. I'm not seeing any more comments. So, all right. Thank you, Amber and Jason.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is item number 6, Greenway Apartments Comprehensive Plan Amendment. It's 2837, 2839, and 2843 11th Avenue South, and 2834, 2836, and 2840 12th Avenue South. And staff is Shayna Settler.
Good afternoon, Vice President Olson, Commissioners. Introduce myself to those of you I haven't met yet. I'm Shanna Sether. I'm a planner with CPED. I'll be presenting the project for the Greenway Apartments Comprehensive Plan Amendment. So unlike a development review application that we would normally be looking at the rezoning applications or details on site plan review, we are really looking today specifically at a request to amend 2 of the maps that are adopted with the comprehensive plan. One of them is the future land use map for one of the properties, and then the other is the built form overlay. So the comprehensive plan amendment process will start with a public hearing at the Planning Commission, and then go on to the City Council for a legislative decision, not unlike a rezoning. But that's not the last stop. So after that, the city, if approved by the City Council, the city will make an application on behalf of the developer to the Metropolitan Council to amend those same maps. And then if approved by the Met Council, we will amend our maps. And then the applicant has the ability to come back and apply for the associated rezonings to change the primary zoning classification, the built form overlay district, and then they'll also apply for the site plan review applications. So when evaluating this type of application, it's kind of difficult to disassociate ourselves from thinking about the project itself, but certainly there are aspects of this project that the applicant has stated further the goals of the comprehensive plan, which is really our analysis on whether or not we should make these changes to the policies. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the project, and then the applicant is also going to fill in some of the information as well, and talk about the community engagement piece. So just a brief note on the community engagement piece. So unlike a land use application, again, for development, the city requires as part of the application process, and this is out of state statute and Minneapolis ordinance, that notifications are sent for public hearings. We use the newspaper, the site is posted with orange placards. We mail out notifications to individual property owners. We have the applicant contact the neighborhood association, and the city does as well. And the council member is also notified. To differentiate and also to kind of mirror the level of effort for community engagement on Minneapolis 2040, the comprehensive plan amendment application requires that the developer host a community meeting on their own in order to solicit feedback from community members, not just necessarily like property owners or the neighborhood association, but business associations, in this case, Midtown Greenway Coalition as well, because they're immediately adjacent. So the applicant will talk about a meeting that they held a couple days ago. And of course, myself and the applicant are available for questions as well. So here's just a mock-up of the proposed development. The reason why the comprehensive plan amendment is required is because the applicant intends to construct a building taller than 3 stories. The future land use map presently is interior 3 for a designation for built form for all of the properties. And in order to allow for a building taller than 3 stories, the comprehensive plan amendment is required. So the applicant has indicated several goals and policies that could be achieved with the taller building, and staff has put that in the memo as well. So unlike some of the comprehensive plan amendments that we've seen so far, we do have one of the development parcels that has a different future land use designation. So this is our 3rd comprehensive plan amendment application that staff and the city have reviewed. And I should say I don't have an application yet, but it will be coming in shortly. So this is the 3rd one we've had, but this is the first one where a developer is asking to amend the future land use designation. So the land use designation tells us, you know, is it urban neighborhood? Is it, in this case, production mixed use? Is it production and processing? And those different classifications kind of really hone in on more of like what we think about for primary classifications. What should be some of the principal uses that are allowed in what would be future associated primary districts. So one of the 6 parcels is slated for production mixed use. That largely reflects what the existing condition of the site is, which appears to be a warehouse or maybe even a contractor's office historically, and that's certainly not the intention of the future use. The future use is intended to be a residential building. So I wanted to highlight some of the adjacencies for built form districts. So you can see this kind of brownish color, tannish brown, that is identified as interior 3. Kind of this maroon color here, and you can see south of the site, that is corridor 6. And then this blue-green color is transit 10. So this particular development site is located with adjacencies to much higher built form designations. And being on the north side of the Greenway, we're not as concerned as foreshadowing impacts to the Greenway when looking at the built form increase. So here are some of the drawings and renderings provided by the applicant and some of their analysis and arguments for the proposed change. Here are some of the nearby other land uses and features of the site, and this was included in your packet today. Here are some of the existing buildings. So the land uses are majority low density residential, and then also this office slash warehouse, maybe even a contractor's office at one time. Site is immediately adjacent to the Greenway. Staff has indicated priorities for any future development here to make sure that we have good connections to the Greenway. As you've seen in the proposed site plan that was included in the packet, there is a proposal to connect the project to the Greenway. I should note that there are 2 parcels here located immediately adjacent to the Greenway that are not owned by the applicant. And as proposed, this would be an affordable housing project with mixed income with affordable ranges between 30% and 80% AMI. But again, that's something that we would really analyze in the future as part of the development application and making sure it complies with inclusionary zoning or other unified housing policies, depending upon the funding that they're seeking. This project is also unique in that they are seeking or planning to add dwelling units that would be for, I believe, it's 11 individuals or households for people who would otherwise be experiencing homelessness. So they are meeting several of the housing goals with this increased height and density, but we would definitely be interested in hearing from the commission directly on thoughts or concerns about the proposed amendment. So that concludes what I have for our presentation. If maybe the applicant wants to fill in, or I'm happy to take any questions right now specific to the applications.
Shanna. Oh, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Smiley, you want to wait? Commissioner Meyer, oh, you also want to wait. I have one quick question before the development team presents. Shanna, would this come to us in 2 applications? Like, would we see everything together, including like site plan review and the comprehensive plan amendment, or would the comprehensive plan amendment come first and then later we would see the application?
Great question, Commissioner Olson. So because of the 60-day law in the state of Minnesota, we more or less have to have a sequential review. So, and that's to make sure that we're meeting our statutory deadlines for delivering decisions to the applicant. So the applicant will apply for the comprehensive plan amendment, and that will have to complete its life cycle. So it will have to at least take it to the legislative decision at the city council. And then if approved, then we would go on to apply to the Met Council that then has its own 60-day review. Typically, they've been shorter than that. I think about a month or so was the last time I had an application for a comprehensive plan amendment. That one was approved for the Simpson PPL project in Whittier by the Met Council. And then once that's approved, then we would amend our maps, and then the applicant team can come forward with the rezonings. Because as it stands right now, a rezoning would have to occur in order to allow for this development. And in order to approve a rezoning, we have to the city would have to find that the proposed rezoning is consistent with the comprehensive plan. As proposed, it is not consistent with the existing land use designation, nor the built form map.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, the developer, the applicant, or the development team, you can go ahead. Introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Thank you, Shanna, for that overview. I'm Kyle Brasser with Reuter Walton Development. I'm the applicant, and I have with me also DGR Architecture, the architect on the team as well. And I'll just do a brief overview of a couple things, touch on a couple of additional things from Shanna's presentation, and then I'm really here to answer questions or listen to your feedback. That's the purpose of today's meeting for me. The reason that we are seeking this comprehensive plan amendment, as Shanna mentioned, first and foremost, is because we are proposing a project that will increase the supply of accessible and affordable housing. The development proposal is 100% affordable. All units will be ranging, will have incomes ranging from 30 to 60% of the AMI. Shanna actually said 80 because at one point we were considering having 80% units. One of the big pieces of feedback we've gotten from the neighborhood is that they really wanted to see more lower income bracketed units. So we've eliminated our 80% units. So we just have 30s, 50s, and 60s. And I think that's an important designation because that's one of the reasons we do need some increased density in order to make the project feasible. If we only had a 3-story building, we simply couldn't, well, first of all, we couldn't create this many units. We also couldn't create a project that was feasible with those income levels. So the main reason, again, is affordable housing that we're seeking this amendment. It also meets goals from the comprehensive plan, the 2040 plan, including creating spaces for more residents, creating healthy, safe, and connected people, creating complete neighborhoods, and a clean environment. So I mentioned those others to just illustrate some of the breadth and the other ways in which we meet comprehensive plan goals. Shanna mentioned we did conduct our public outreach meeting. We had it on Tuesday evening. It was attended by about 10 individuals, so it was relatively well attended. The feedback regarding the project and the comprehensive plan amendment were both overwhelmingly positive. The comprehensive plan amendment, we really only received positive feedback. We even had some members mention that the Midtown Phillips Neighborhood Association had undertaken a comprehensive plan study themselves many years ago, and they had slated this site and a couple of the other adjacent sites for a 3 to 5 story building. So we fit right in that band. And then of course the affordable housing is something that they feel very strongly about, and they they were excited to hear that that's what our proposal contained. I will mention that just prior to getting on this meeting, I received a forwarded correspondence from an individual within Midtown Phillips who felt that our public outreach was not sufficient. We did do the required public outreach as far as posting a sign on the site and sending out notices in enough time in advance of the meeting. We also worked with kind of a public team to come up with 11 different either neighborhood associations. We included both Midtown Phillips and Powderhorn Park in our outreach, and then several other local either kind of business councils or coalitions. Shanna mentioned the Greenway Coalition, for example. And so I want everybody to understand that we did undertake a thoughtful community outreach. However, given the letter that we did just receive, I don't want to advance our application and have individuals or groups feel like they were left out. So I'm kind of reacting to this real time, but it's my intention to hold a second public meeting so that people who feel like they were not contacted or didn't have time to respond or something like that have the chance to this time. So when you see that correspondence, which I'm sure you will, hopefully that provides just some additional detail, and that you understand that we'll address it appropriately, and we'll make sure people are included. I'm really here to answer questions, like I mentioned, and that's my overview. So I'm here for questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Smiley.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, and thank you for staff and the developer for presenting this. I do really like the idea of intensified use of this site because of its proximity to both transit and trail, and there's lots of other services that are around. And also, I wanted to say that regarding a land use amendment, I personally don't see any problem with that. I do think that future plans change. Like you can adopt something, and the next day a better idea may come along. So I don't think I think we should be flexible in that term. My only one question, actually I have two questions, is one is that it was mentioned that this project will be 100% affordable. So I'm just kind of wondering how is that guaranteed, and whether there's a specific company or management or organization that will be in charge of following up on that. And also the other thing is kind of wondering about the design element of this project in terms of just materials and whatnot, and kind of wondering if this will be the last or this is the last rendering, or is it like kind of like a first draft?
Sure. I'm going to respond to those questions actually in reverse order because the design question's a little bit of a quicker answer. But this is not the final draft. And I think that's what Shanna was trying to explain. And I was trying to also a little bit in that this is really, think of it as two successive applications. So this first one is to hopefully get the approval to amend the comprehensive plan, which would then allow for the rezoning that we need to seek to get our building. So if this passes, then we will go through the typical land use approval process, which will consist of a more comprehensive building overview. What are the materials? What are the colors? What are the do we have balconies? Do we have all these different building specific items, which we are working on plans for right now, but this is not final. This is very much a rough draft. So I can't speak to specifically what the materials would even be, but at this point, typically it's some sort of a masonry base and some either cementitious or metal panel siding above that. So, I mean, but aside from that, there's been very little thought given to the materials at this point yet. And then to answer your question about affordability, So a project like this, we apply for several different sources of public financing. The most notable of which is the low-income housing tax credit, and that carries with it restrictions, an actual land use restriction on the ability to rent at certain levels, certain income levels. We received an award from the City of Minneapolis's Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which also carries similar restrictions. So just from a starting point, we have actual covenants that will be recorded against the land at closing that say you cannot rent to individuals who make more than a certain amount, and you cannot have rent levels that are more than a certain amount for a certain amount of time. And the minimum affordability period would be 30 years. And then so it's required that the ownership entity, like the developer, for example, make sure that those guidelines are maintained, or there are financial penalties, pretty significant ramifications that can happen. And the management company is responsible for tracking the compliance and making sure that the guidelines are followed. But it's a very strict process. And so this is not like oh, we're going to keep the rents at a certain level. It's like we have specific guidelines we have to follow, or we're not in compliance with our funding.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm going to let Shanna go and then Chris.
I was just going to add on. So if the comprehensive plan amendment is approved, we will see the project again at a future committee of the whole to review specific information regarding the development, including the materials of the structure. So this is not the only opportunity, but it would be if it's not amended. But if the comprehensive plan amendment is approved, then we'll see it again.
And good clarification that we will come back to committee of the whole too. I know not everybody does that. We'll come back to this group before actually going to Planning Commission for the more formal meeting.
Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. I think this comp plan amendment would be consistent with the spirit of the comp plan, as Commissioner Ismaili said. This is very close to high frequency transit and the Midtown Greenway. It's also close to a grocery store, lots of restaurants, lots of other services. I think it would make sense for this particular parcel to be Transit 10, like nearby parcels are. And I also think it makes sense for it to have residential. I think that's much more fitting for an area close to transit and the Greenway. I think this is a much better use than the 8-story parking garage that we approved very close by to this. Yes, but seeing that you're only building 5 stories, shows that you're not even maximizing what you could get under Corridor 6, so it probably wouldn't be important for you to go to Transit 10 if that's the case, but I think it would justify Transit 10 nonetheless. And I know that this is something that we can get into more if and when you come back, but someone did ask me on Twitter to ask Reuter Walton's architect why they put the bike storage room on the wrong side of the building for Midtown Greenway access. I don't know if that's something that should be answered now or if you want to wait, but I did just want to put that question out there because I was asked on Twitter to do that.
That's a fair question. I will let the architect respond, but I'll also kind of soften it for them a little bit and say the programming of the common spaces is one of the many things that will take place with a more serious and kind of a more fine-tooth comb, if you will, between now and when we come back for the land use. So Josh and Scott, I kind of gave you a pass, but maybe you have a good reason that it is where it is, and go right ahead.
Hello, is my microphone on?
Yep.
Hello, I'm Josh with DJR. One of the reasons that we put it there was because I know that there is the ramp on the 11th Avenue side, but on the 12th Avenue side, we're looking at replacing the stair that goes down to the Greenway. So we were thinking that that could also be another access, potentially with like a bike rail on that stair, although that hasn't been determined yet. So yeah, that's one of the reasons that we put it over there, but it's certainly worth looking at placing it on the other side, because on that side you do have the bike trail and the ramp that goes down.
All right. Thank you for clarifying that. And yeah, I think, like I said, I think this is consistent with the spirit of the master plan. And I think, above and beyond that, for this to be serving low income people, and particularly people who are transitioning from houselessness, I think is especially fitting. It would be especially great if some of the people who were previously camping on the Greenway, if they could maybe move in there and stay within the same neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sweezy.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I have some concerns about this from a comp plan amendment point of view that I just want to talk about real briefly. So far, when we've been having these discussions about amending the 2040 plan, they have been about putting larger things in places in neighborhoods that are already extremely dense and extremely built out, which is why you tend to have these lower designations for this particular parcel, like Interior 3. And one of the broad goals of the comp plan here, and some of the reasons that you have these lower density designations, is because these parts of the city are very, very built, filled and dense already. And I think the hope long term was that we would start to see things happening in other parts of the city, not just the same parts of the city. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is, when we talk about, this is consistent with the goals of the comp plan. I've said this before, but there are many, many goals in the comp plan. And as long as we always just kind of hinge on the one that says we should have more housing, that's going to justify putting something bigger anywhere in the entire city. And I think this needs a little bit more analysis than something like that long term. And I think we should be really looking carefully at these in terms of the precedent that they set. I don't agree with Commissioner Esmaili that we should do this because every day somebody can have a better idea. That may be the case, but so much planning and thought went into this comp plan, which is again a parcel by parcel look at the city of Minneapolis. So the fact that there's access to transit here, and the fact that there's restaurants nearby, and the fact that it's close to the Greenway, all of these things, it's only very recently that the comp plan was adopted. All of these things were known at the time the property was designated the way it was. So to my way of thinking, a comp plan amendment should be something that's, compared on a case-by-case basis, of course, but with what we're really trying to do. The city does have to have a comp plan, and it is supposed to mean something. And even a good project maybe sometimes doesn't need to be approved because it's not consistent with the comp plan and what we were trying to do. So I think we need to, this discussion feels like to me a normal committee of the whole discussion where we're talking about, what's the building like and all these other kinds of things, instead of really the different conversation I think we should be having, which is what does the comp plan mean and when is something significant enough that we're going to amend it, keeping in mind that part of the reason that these have the designations they do, the land use designations they do, is because they're in a more dense part of the city to begin with. So that's my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sweezy. Commissioner Baxley.
Thank you. I'll echo Commissioner Sweezy's comments about comp plan modification. I think I'll just second those. And maybe just on a more tactical side, I think for us to truly understand this, it is great it's on the north side, doesn't shadow the Greenway, but by putting it on the north side, it creates extreme shadowing for the inward block, from the scale of the building. So I know the applicant has put a few shadow studies in at the sort of extreme conditions of the day. I think really showing more of those so we fully understand the height implication and what that shadowing looks like would be helpful. for us to evaluate that, not just at 1 hour after sunrise or 1 hour before sunset. I think truly understanding the reach of that scale before we make a decision would really be helpful in evaluating that. And I think since it was included in there, I just, not knowing if you're shooting for a certain density of parking, but your parking plan for the building looks sort of painfully tight in terms of number of spots. So just wanted to register that. Thank you.
Commissioner Ford.
Yes, thank you. I want to follow up with the comments that Commissioner Sweezy said and ask the staff, so what was the rationale for deciding upon the current designation for this property, these properties?
So thank you, Commissioner Ford, for the question. I would say that a combination of looking at existing policies that were on the books as a result of Midtown Greenway rezoning studies and the Midtown land use plans that had happened previously. As I believe Kyle also mentioned that there had been some more neighborhood level work that had been done that was more site specific, that was not reflected in the previous zoning rezoning study. And so I think that there are a number of factors, of course, that were taken into consideration to identify this area as Interior 3. So I'll speak first about the build form and then we can talk a little bit about the land use. So I think it generally was reflective of policy that was there previously and adopted previously, and probably its proximity. I couldn't say specifically because I was not on that part of the team that went parcel by parcel, so I couldn't say specifically why this site was designated as Interior 3. As far as a future land use designation goes, it seems as though urban neighborhood, which is pretty consistent with the remainder of the general area, with the exception of this one parcel at 2839 11th Avenue South. That parcel is already a non-residential use. It looks to be having previously been or currently being used as a contractor's office. So something like for building or mechanical system or plumbing company that is housed there that may have some things that are stored indoors, and also had been a warehouse at one time. So that production mixed use designation kind of recognizes an industrial character that may be already present and encourages something to continue at that site with a similar designation. Seeing as how this is part of a larger development project and the applicant was not seeking to add production uses within the proposed redevelopment, they are also seeking to amend the future land use map to modify or amend that single parcel from production mixed use to urban neighborhood. But I couldn't say specifically why this site was designated Interior 3. I mean, we can look back at the maps and see that there is variation and in the adjacencies. So we have larger areas here that are Interior 3, south here as well, but immediately across the Greenway, we're seeing Corridor 6. On the same stretch of 11th on the opposite side of the block, we have Corridor 6 as well. And then across the Greenway to the southwest and to the west generally, we have Transit 10, which is along Chicago Avenue, which is a goods and services corridor. So there's ideas about proximity to other land use features, such as a goods and services corridor, and then also maybe the Midtown Greenway. I hope that answers your question as best I can.
Well, one could kind of wonder why didn't that say all that rationale come into play when we were when the plan was first adopted here. But okay, I understand you can't particularly respond to that. Thank you.
All right, commissioners, any other comments or questions? All right, thank you, Shanna. Our next, let's see. Our final discussion item for the evening is item number 7, American Spirit at 801 9th Street Southeast, and staff is Lindsay Silas.
Good evening, commissioners. I will go ahead and share my screen here. All right, so this project is located at 801 9th Street Southeast. It is, here's a rendering of it. It is a project where they have, it's a large site that has 1- and 2-story industrial buildings on it right now that occupies about 2.7 acres. This is kind of an interesting area of Marcy Homes where there historically have been industrial uses, although we have seen some new construction, including right across the street from this proposed location. So the site here has, as you can see, it's right on the border of the neighborhood. It has a number of buildings that will remain, although in these aerial views, this building in the middle here was demolished for a surface parking lot. So basically the current situation is 2 combined industrial buildings on the eastern half of the site and 3 combined industrial buildings on the western half of the site, along with on the far eastern side of the site, a surface parking lot. So the applicant has proposed to construct a new planned unit development that would consist of 3 buildings. That would be the existing industrial buildings that make up 2 buildings, and then a new construction of residential building on that surface parking lot. And here's a view of the new building that would be on the far eastern side of the site. So the makeup of these buildings, this site is located in production mixed use and corridor 6. So traditionally what we have said, what staff and planning commission has said with regards to production mixed use is that residential units are allowed as long as they're part of a building that provides production space. These spaces are intended to be to retain production space in a city that is changing and to ensure that production uses, which tend to be places that provide high wage jobs, are preserved, and there continue to be spaces for those to locate in Minneapolis. So due to the large quantity of existing ground floor space on in this development, they are proposing to provide over 50% of the ground floor area as production space. This floor plan shows the layout of the makeup of that space. There is an athletic field proposed in one of the spaces, and then it's not on here. We'll eventually get to a floor plan that shows the second story. So this second building from the west will have production space on the main floor and 1 live work unit, and then live work units on the upper floor. So it will that building will contain, I believe, 22 units, and then the new apartment building will contain 90 and will be 6 stories tall. So here's some floor plans for the new proposed building. It's primarily going to be one bedroom and studio apartments and some 2 bedrooms. Some more images there. And I might come back to these. Oh, okay, so here's another floor plan that shows the makeup of the ground floor area. This 1 live work unit on the first floor, and then the live work units above, as well as they're showing using the roof of one of the production buildings for a football field. So the applicant has proposed to rezone the site to add the industrial living overlay district. They are proposing to establish a planned unit development, and the reason that is needed is because of the proposal to have 3 separate buildings on the site, 2 of them being residential. The only way to do that is to provide a planned unit development. In your memo, we had identified the following. So they need alternatives to establish more than 1 principal residential building on the lot. Sign standards was identified, although the applicant has informed staff that they do not plan to seek the sign standard alternative at this time. And if their plans and signage needs require, they can come back through to the Planning Commission at a later date to add that. They're asking to reduce the minimum amount of required off-street parking from 135 spaces to 110. That is currently required, although as this commission is aware, with parking changes driven by the goals in 2040, that potentially may not be required by the time the land use application is deemed complete. They are requesting to reduce the minimum amount of required bicycle parking as well. And then they would also need preliminary and final plat and site plan review. So in general, the rezoning to the industrial living overlay district is something that makes sense in a production mixed use space. As I said, slightly more than 50% of the ground floor area is proposed to be production uses. One big concern that staff does have is that the applicant hasn't identified tenants for these spaces. So as you'll see from this floor plan, there are several separate spaces, and some of these buildings actually have more walls that are even shown on this floor plan that might break up these production spaces into kind of strange and unusable shapes. And so the applicant hasn't really provided kind of details on what types of users they're trying to attract, or whether they propose to renovate these spaces to make them more attractive. So staff is concerned about this large quantity of production space that is being proposed without any tenants or kind of a plan for what type of tenants to attract. And hopefully the applicant will be able to speak to that as well. And then corridor 6, this is where this site is located. And so the proposed new construction is 6 stories, which is consistent with that. So in terms of feedback, there's a few things. So staff is looking for feedback from the Planning Commission on whether the proposed uses within the development meet the intent of production mixed use. Production areas are intended to provide living wage jobs, and as noted, the applicant hasn't identified tenants for these spaces, nor have they identified how they're going to modify these spaces to make them attractive to tenants. Also, in terms of design of the building, staff does have concerns about some of this orientation of windows, especially on the east elevation, which faces residential uses. The windows in general, are not, consistent shapes, nor are they all vertically oriented as guided for in our site plan review chapter. The other thing about the elevations is that, which kind of comes through more in the rendering, is that they are pretty flat with a lack of articulation. One other concern staff had was on the proposal to reduce the minimum bicycle parking requirement, especially for a building that is also proposing to provide a large number of units while not meeting the vehicle parking requirement either. So I am happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Smiley.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. I have a few questions. First of all, I agree that there is no articulation in the design of this building. I have a clarifying question, and that is basically the live work definition is coming from this side of the building being completely residential and the remodeled industrial areas being the workspace. Is that correct?
So we don't actually have a definition for live workspaces, and we don't allow those to count towards production requirements or commercial requirements. So the applicant is has shown on all their plans that these will be live work spaces, but we don't have any sort of guidance for what that means or what that has to provide. So in terms of how the planners and the zoning code would evaluate that, those would just be apartments.
Okay, because yeah, I was just gonna say regarding your comment in the report and saying that there is that that the staff is concerned about how it will be maintained. I was gonna ask how are other similar projects maintained, because I know we do have live work projects in the city. The other yeah, this side of it looks like a regular residential building. Other couple of questions that I have is kind of one is regarding traffic flow, because the street is like it doesn't have that many outlets. It doesn't have much connectivity on either side. It's just one side basically. So I'm just kind of wondering how that will work out. And then I was also wondering what that remodeling of the industrial site entails, and if, again, if those, based on the, as I'm looking at it, if this is supposed to, from the applicant side, be a part of that residential site as well, then can they at least be connected to each other? So that if people are supposed to be living and then working, but then again, you did mention that there isn't a definition, but just kind of wondering from the applicant's perspective, if you know.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue. I know that we have the applicant's team on the call, so hopefully they will be able to speak up. I'm not sure if they have to press *6 or anything like that.
Would you like us to respond now?
Yeah, go ahead.
That'd be great.
This is Michael Margulies. I'm with Valerian LLC. I'm the project manager for the owner. With me is Dean DeVolis from DGR Architecture. Let me see if I can address some of the questions and then answer, and Dean can probably work a little bit more specifically on some of the architectural questions. I'd like to address, first of all, the question of the tenant mix. This is an interesting project where we're taking space that was originally industrial and is being converted to a more of a production use that is not really industrial right now. So what we're finding is that we have interest from tenants who produce things, and it's sort of a modern day production or a modern day version of what industrial used to be. So we do have tenants that we have signed up and that in fact are preparing to occupy. One produces materials and display materials for grocery stores and for retail outlets. So they design, construct, assemble products and product displays. That's sort of the new version of production. Another productions tenant that is going in one of the smaller units in the west portion of the building is is a content producer for food production. So they bring in video and classroom materials, and they video them and sell these, stream these videos for a fairly large audience. We have a tenant signed up that produces athletic content. They produce for the soccer industry, soccer materials, soccer products, soccer clothing, soccer training videos. And that's why you see an athletic field that is used for demonstration and for production. So those are the type of tenants that are signed up at this point. We don't have all the tenants on board yet, but that's the direction that this is headed. To respond to the commissioner's question about live work, we look at live work a different way. Live work is the mode where somebody occupies a unit and uses that unit for the production of a product or their profession. So for example, a good live work example, and people who are interested in this are jewelry makers or ceramicists or other people who produce art. Unfortunately, the city doesn't consider, even though that they're primarily using this as production, the city doesn't consider that to be production space, so we've excluded it. But that's a fairly high demand type of unit for artisans and small business people that allows them the affordable opportunity to both live and work. It's sort of the living above the store concept. And if I can address one other question that Lindsay brought up with respect to bicycle parking, we may have a difference of counts. Our count shows that we require 60 bicycle parking, and we're providing 70. To the extent that we are, her count is different than ours, our commitment is that we will meet or exceed whatever the code requires with respect to parking. With that, I'm going to ask Dean DeVolis to talk about articulation and things related to the architectural side.
Commissioners, good evening. This is Dean DeVolis. The next to me is Ati Westfall, the project architect, hence why we're wearing our mask.
I don't think we can see either of you, Dean.
You can't?
No.
We can see you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can see you.
You're good. So let me answer some of Lindsay's comments concerning the industrial spaces. I want to get that. This project was a series of additions. It was one large company, but it was additions built over 20 years. So the long walls that run north-south are bearing walls in the building. We can cut some holes, but they're very difficult to remove. So some of the walls are necessary to hold the building up, because think of the building as like a series of slices of bread and the nature. The rising walls we show is to give tenant flexibility. We've had a lot more interest in smaller manufactured tenants as opposed to, you think of a large manufacturer like Graco or something like that. And Michael actually gave a good example of it. We want to enhance the manufacturer. The thing we did is we preserved all the loading docks. So this building actually has 6 semi-docks. We preserved those, and then we made additional modifications of the building in the rear and side to increase accessibility to make sure that the manufacturers could succeed, because the lifeblood of manufacturing is trucking and the railroad obviously behind. And so we actually enhanced that and developed that. So we want to make this manufacturing comfortable, accessible, easy. But the trend is smaller boutique manufacturers, and certainly think of the large mass productions. They're tending to move out west to Rockford and places like that. But what's happening in the city is these smaller creative tenants, like the one Mosquito Inc., which creates store displays for like Caribou Coffee, things like the Fit Foodie, the Futsal that Michael made, Circle of Disciplines. So we're starting to get a creative mix of smaller boutique industry mixing, which a manufacturer I think is a real good positive, because you're starting to get a variety of manufacturers, a lot of good, strong, independent companies. But the building set up, they could handle larger spaces. We have one that wishes to be larger. We can accommodate someone up to 10,000 square feet. So we're just finding smaller niche manufacturers are wanting to be in this area. And I think that's a good thing to consider the richness of the building in that aspect. Architecturally, we really try to enhance 2 things. Enhance the manufacturer experience in terms of accessibility and all that I described. And the other is enhancing the, what I call the residential experience. And, page 13 of our book, that overall view Lindsay shows the parks, alcoves, and elements, and the building variety. So the project has a lot of interest in scale in architecture. It wasn't one continuous flat wall. So I really want to start to break up the math and create the ins and outs and articulation within it. I'll let Adi address this further. We sort of chose intentionally to keep the housing portion of it more simple in terms of letting the lower base of the building speak more loudly. So it wasn't attention to the taller part of the building, it was really attention to the base conditions of parking. So that was a decision of creating these individual parking spots and inches along street level and let the housing building be simpler in architectural form with large windows to really give the maximum kind of lighting and vision within the unit. So that was part of the basis of it, particularly in the front, along the streets, and create a lot of interest. Because what we're starting to see here, you know, we're excited about this project, we're starting to see a very interesting community of manufacturers, athletic display, futsal, and housing. So you're starting to get this segment to have a lot of creative, unique, active uses, which is really starting to, I think, become a good blueprint for what, you know, it's called the manufacturing housing district in the city. And Ati, you want to address the architecture a bit? This is Ati Westfall.
Hi, my name is Ati Westfall. I wanted to say one thing just about the housing building on the end. There's always that point where you kind of make a decision about your material palette and how you're going to work with the facade, and we really wanted to focus on the pedestrian level, and really kind of emphasize that with unique materials and colors and patterns, and above keep a more neutral palette with the white. There is actually some depth that's a little bit difficult to read in the rendering. The window frames on this building have a bit of a bump out that, given different lighting conditions and times of day, would create some recession and protrusion on the facade. And then to the one comment about the windows that were in the ramp facing the east, the windows, they were requested that they be vertically oriented, and when we tried that out, it felt so rigid at that level that we needed to do something a little bit more playful. So we changed the proportion of the windows and kind of scattered them along the facade that would create both interest from inside of the garage, but then also from the little pocket park at the end of the site there for people that are, you know, spending time outside with the plants and their dogs, accessing the dog run at the back of the building.
So we'll conclude here and stand for questions. So thank you.
I do want to add two things, if I may. First, we've had two very productive listening sessions with the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association, who are very protective, as you know, of this area and are very insightful. They have had generally positive comments about both this project and the way it can serve to revitalize and act as a catalyst for a new kind of lifestyle in this area. So we're pleased at that. The other, you addressed the last question that I think Lindsay brought up, is you sort of face a chicken and the egg situation with respect to tenants. Because we are changing the use and the permitted use of this project, we can't, until we receive all of our entitlements, fully commit a wide variety of tenants to this space, because we simply don't know what we're going to be allowed to do. So until we get a little bit further in the entitlements, we can't. We are somewhat limited in the tenants that we have, but we have 4 or 5 tenants right now who are signed, who represent the type of production tenants that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Thank you. We will start questions with Commissioner Meyer.
Thank you. You know, I feel that so long as they're providing the production space necessary, I don't feel a need to micromanage how they do it. And I do think that there definitely is a significant demand for the smaller spaces. In fact, some people in the neighborhood had asked me just a few months ago if there was a space nearby that I knew of, and I didn't know of any, and they actually located in St. Louis Park, but they would like to move. So I might be able to connect you with one additional tenant for that. Did have a couple other questions. First, can you tell me about the athletic field? Like, who is that designed to serve? Is that like something that people from the public would be able to use or rent?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michael, go ahead, or you want me?
Go ahead, Dean.
So the answer is yes. This is an industry, it's called futsal, which is basically miniature soccer. Sort of think of pickleball. So the company that manufactures uniforms, all that Michael mentioned, yes, there's a tremendous demand for this type of smaller scale soccer, and a lot of youth residents of the city have taken on to this type of sport, and it's futsal, and it's done very well and a lot of interest in it, and it has the ability to be both an indoor-outdoor sport. So as we playing with the plans of this building, now we have the futsal field, we're also looking at the potentially developing, we're looking at the economics of it. We put in our presentation of the roof to create additional futsal facility out of it. So we start to double up in that kind of activity. It's essentially indoor soccer, but the slang to it is called futsal, and that's what it's referred to. So long answer to your question, yes, it would be open to the public and to various leagues.
And what we're finding is that the demand for this is pretty strong, and it's pretty diverse. There are a lot of different communities who participate in it. Particularly a lot of the East African communities are forming leagues, and so it's and some of the operational expertise for these tenants are coming from those communities as well. So we think it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the demand for it. I heard, I've heard quite a lot of from many different constituents requesting more space for it during the East of the River Master Plan process, and just sporadically. Right now, a lot of people, I mean, they're going all the way out to Blaine to play because there's just such a limitation on the space nearby. So just from a park board perspective, I'm very happy to see this proposed because it alleviates a little bit of the pressure on me. You answered the next question I was going to ask, but I just wanted to say I'm pleased that you're committing to meet or exceed the bike parking requirement. Last question I wanted to ask about is, would it be possible for you to consolidate the curb cuts for your parking into one entrance/exit?
That is tough because of the tightness of the site. And we looked at it, and it's not like and it's a housing site, because we're so tight, if we put an interior ramp, we'd wipe out all the parking, which is one thing we promised in the neighborhood meetings, that we would maximize parking as much as possible. So as far as, that's how we said, we need an extra curb cut, but we get a lot more spaces in the building. So in terms of the neighbor reaction, they were happy with that approach, that we're erring on the side of additional parking as opposed to a single curb cut. So that's the approach we took at the request of the neighborhood.
Well, I live in the neighborhood, and I have the opposite request. I would like to see you minimize vehicle parking and to reduce the curb cuts. I know that there are competing voices on that, but for the ordinances that we're looking at that might be in effect when you submit your final application, like we're trying to push for less vehicle parking across the board. So if that was the reason why, I mean, I would certainly much prefer for you to have it consolidated into one curb cut.
Okay, and that's understood. Is that this is the, like say, competing forces that come with parking and discussions on it. So understood.
All right. Thank you. That was all my questions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Ford.
I'm sorry. No, I have no questions anymore. I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Baxley.
Thank you. I think this could be such an exciting addition to the neighborhood. So I think preserving production space, combining it with apartments is wonderful. And I think we have an opportunity here to make the housing not look like housing. I think this is maybe one case where flatness is better, that somehow the apartments, part of the production space, there's an aesthetic there and almost a sort of a district definition that doesn't want to be like every other apartment building. So I would encourage the team to really explore the sort of aesthetic of the industrial there, because it'll differentiate the apartment spaces from particularly ones across the street and anywhere in town. You have the opportunity here to kind of tie this all together in a really compelling, unique way that would probably drive rents, that would, I think it's just, so explore that. And I think flatness in this case and materiality could be wonderfully industrial and beautiful. My question on the roof use, is that's on an existing building, correct? The proposal for, so is that typically those are pretty light gauge things, and the reinforcing to change from, say, snow load to live load gets pretty intense. So I'm sure you guys are aware of that, and there's some costs there. But if you're going to do that, I think we were talking about, the community access and this whole other network of getting up off the street and onto the roofs as a sort of another layer and a wonderful sort of component to this, as opposed to just internal circulation, could really be lovely in a way to expand the sort of pedestrian experience up and over top of the building, and kind of a pretty cool way. If you're going to commit to reinforcing it, might as well kind of look at all of that. And then lastly, the parking, where you're removing the building, that long linear spot is probably necessary for counts and things, but boy, I can sure imagine that space also becoming, work days done, gates closed, people are out there playing, it's got that sort of do it. So however we think about lots, maybe this isn't just about tar and stripes. There's another way to kind of treat it as a room, an outdoor room that the production folks use, that the community uses, that's part of the complex in the story here. So just wonderful opportunity, guys. I think just really drive it to be something unique, and it doesn't have to look like apartments, doesn't have to look like sheds, but the combination could be really powerful. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you. You're reading our minds. I appreciate that, because we're thinking along the same lines you are. So thank you so much.
Great.
All right, Commissioner Caprini.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, the sun's in my eyes. I did not shut the curtain, so if you've seen that bright light like I'm seeing. Anyway, the building, the materials that are used on the outside reminds me of the Wiseman Museum on campus, and I'm wondering, is it that kind of shiny, or is it more of a muted? I don't know. What's the word I'm looking for? Gosh, Batman comes to my mind.
It's a white
Microchromatic. That's the word I think I'm looking for. And then someone, I don't recall who mentioned the details that we aren't seeing in this image. Because when I first looked at it while the presenter was speaking, I was like, oh my God, that looks like a parking ramp. But then I started to really let myself be a lot less judgmental, because it is in an industrial zone, and I started to appreciate it more. So I started to think more about the intricate details that were mentioned that I missed, that I kind of see. And then I'm wondering again if the material is similar to the Wiseman on campus, or is it a little bit more muted than that?
It's I can speak to that, Commissioner. The white portion it's a white corrugated metal. And the windows, I mentioned that there's a small reveal or protrusion around the windows to give the facade some depth, but it still has quite that flat effect. and then you're kind of noticing that from the patinaed copper colored line that's green, that separates the upper part of the building from the lower. From there down, we're using really, we're proposing precast that is designed this with a very beautiful color, and that we've used very carefully considered the way that the ramp works at P1 to be able to have this courtyard set back with lush planting as a visual amenity to everyone who actually occupies this space, whether it's from the sidewalk or from the inside of the building. We've kept that main facade at that ground level all glazed to provide as much interaction between in and out as possible, and to kind of play with the contrast of those materials, like a very earthen base with a kind of white cloud-like upper portion.
Okay, so the garage door, is that white or is it the same color as the building? Because in my brain, I mean, I don't know. Answer the question first, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on what my brain goes to.
I think that might have been a little bit of an oversight on our part. We probably would prefer that building to create a kind of.
I'm sorry, could you repeat what you said? Because someone in my kitchen is pouring themselves, they're getting ice from the ice machine, and I didn't hear you.
I was going to say, we would most likely prefer that garage door to be a similar color or the same color as the base of the building to kind of keep the facade continuous.
Correct.
So is there some kind of texture on that part of where the garage door is on that particular part of the building, or because I feel like I'm seeing some kind of lines or something?
There is. It's a precast concrete wall panel system, but the concrete has been dyed.
Okay, well, you know what? Just my 2 cents. It would be nice if it all kind of worked well together and blended. Not so you would hit the wall, but if you were trying to back into the building. But you understand, I'm not an architect or a design major. I'm just looking at it and giving you my perspective. So, but thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other comments from commissioners? Okay, thank you, Lindsay, and thank you to the development team.
Commissioner, thank you very much. Appreciate your insights.
All right, commissioners, we have completed all of the items on our agenda for this meeting. I will ask members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. All right, if not, and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Our next committee of the whole meeting. Oh, did someone have something to say? Okay, I think that's just some feedback. Our next committee of the whole meeting will be Thursday, April 15th, 2021, and our next planning commission meeting will be Monday, April 12th, 2021. Thank you.